How did Ravenswood get its name? Well, take yourself back to 1976, which is when I started the winery. You've got a guy who hadn't been a winemaker, but had spent a number of years with a guy named Joseph Swan, learning how to make wine, working several jobs, doing research at Mount Zion Hospital on tea sales, but had really decided to move out of the laboratory world and into the wine world. Living in Berkeley, Chaponese was just starting up, Pig by the Tail. It was like food and wine adventure heaven time. Yeah, I had hair down to here. My beard was about down to here. So, I'm a little different than I am now, although not really. But I am really desperate to have a winery. So I am going to do this at all costs. So my first thing is to go out and try to find some grapes. This is not easy because I look like a hippie. Farmers are conservative. They don't want to sell me grapes. After some doing an intercession of Joe Swan, I've convinced this guy that I'm actually, going to make good wine from his grapes, and I'm actually going to pay for them. But he doesn't believe that. So I have to pay him for the grapes before I actually get the grapes. So these grapes, they're mine. Normally you can sort of, have some flexibility about the grapes. If the farmer, screws up in the last minute, you can say, I don't want those grapes, but they're mine. So I set up the tasting, or the picking very carefully by tasting the grapes and watching how they're developing. And I picked them at the very last minute, just before a big rainstorm is moving into Sonoma. The deal is that I'm taking my grapes and my boxes, my boxes and my truck to the vineyard, and Joe Bogenson, who is the person who has this vineyard, who this wine was made from, is going to pick the grapes, put them in the boxes, load them on my truck. I'm going to come up, pick up the truck at 6:30, and drive it back to the winery and crush them. What could go wrong? Well, turns out that some things can go wrong. Joe actually picked the grapes. When I got there at 6:30, I found 4 tons of grapes spread over 4 acres of vineyard in 50-pound lug boxes, but he neglected to put them on the truck, and there is nobody around. Well, this is a bit of a problem because there's a rainstorm moving in that night. In fact, it's already beginning to rain in the hills around me. This winery almost got named Arco-Iris or Arc-en-Ciel because of all the rainbows that were happening in the hills around me as the sun was going down. It was like an amazing scene. Honestly, I wasn't smoking anything. It just was that way. The panic set in. This is my livelihood. I've spent my last dollar on grapes. I'm running down the roads, picking up boxes, putting them at the end of the grapes, loading them on the truck, just doing what I can to get these grapes on the truck. And it's getting dark. I turn on the light, and while I'm doing this, these 2 huge ravens float into the vineyard, and they sit in the tree, and they begin sort of croaking at me like ravens do. Every time I bring a box over, I can't tell whether they're annoyed with me or whether they're cheering me on. But of course, the first thing I think about is Edgar Allan Poe and Nevermore and The Sweet Lenore and Things Lost, and my heart begins to sink a little bit. But we keep working at it. It gets dark. It rains around me. It never rains on me, interestingly enough. I got the truck loaded. I get it down to Joe Swan's winery, which is where I'm making the wine that year. We offload the grapes. We dump them in the crusher. At 1 o'clock that morning, we finish up, and the skies open up and it pours. So it hasn't rained on me the entire time, even though it's rained around me. It's probably magic, really. And I remembered, I'd gone to school in the Northwest, and in the Northwest, the Inuit Indians have Raven as a trickster god. Now, Raven is a really interesting character. He's really a creative guy. He's brought fire and light. He found man in a pot on the beach, taught him how to survive under the worst possible conditions, made woman, all those kind of cool things that creator gods do. So I thought, yay, maybe I've just run into my first totem. Now, remember, I'm living in Berkeley, and I'm reading Carlos Castaneda, The Yaqui Way, where you find your spirit guide, so I'm susceptible to this whole notion of totem. So Raven sort of becomes my bird, if you will, my totem. But Raven Winery never quite sounded right. So I go out and sort of continue working in the wine thing. But I've gotten to the point now where I've got 2 vintages under my belt. I haven't sold a single bottle of wine. I don't have enough money to bottle it. Let's say my domestic life isn't doing really well at the moment. I've got to move to Sonoma eventually, which means that I have to leave my nice secure job in San Francisco. There's a lot of turmoil going on in my life, and I just happened to go to an opera called Lucia di Lammermoor. Now, it's a really cheery opera. Everybody dies. Lucia goes mad before she dies. But the erstwhile hero of this opera novel by Scott, actually, called The Bride of Lammermoor, his ultimate fate is to wander in the moor and drown in the quicksand. Now, what could be more perfect? I am completely, smitten with the wine business, but I'm kind of wandering in my own moor, and there seems like there's quicksand at every turn. But Ravenswood, I kind of like the name. The last in the line of the lords of Ravenswood Castle. I thought it really fits my sense of drama quite well. And it gets the name Ravenswood in it. So hence, Ravenswood. Obviously, I haven't drowned it in the quicksand, far from it. It's all worked out very well. But Ravenswood has turned out to be a really wonderful name for this winery. And it's been quite successful for me, and I'm very pleased that it worked out the way it did.